Good morning. Today being the 10th of Teves, the fast day, so we'll learn a sikha from the Rebbe on this topic. This is a sikha that is printed in Yiddish, actually. It's a very short one compared to all the other ones, so I think we'll be able to cover it in this, the time left. You know that the tinus of Asara BeTeves is mitam zevas by in dem tag samach melach bavel al Yerushalayim ve'aviyeh b'motzir u'b'motzir. But the mitzvah chongem klolos in nagos. We all know that the reason we fast today is because on this day the king of Babylonia laid siege on Jerusalem, and that was the beginning of the first future tribulations of the Jewish people, the destruction and ultimately the exile from Israel. This is what we're talking about in the first temple now. The Speter dike Merois b'shiva asar b'tamuz hufga'ir b'tisha b'av v'churban b'es hamigdash in Gimel b'tisha in the Baruch Hashanah Aridas Gedalia and given b'pasha hemshav in the Motzah Yerushalayim. Because the other three fast days, the 17th of Tammuz when they broke through the walls of Jerusalem, and on Tisha B'av when they actually destroyed the temple, and on the 3rd of Tishrei when we fast for the killing of Gedalia, those were all direct continuation, and they were just a result. It came following the siege that was laid on the 10th of Teves. So the beginning was on the 10th of Teves. Das ist der Asbore in dem Das Avudraham, als the Tinus for the Asara BeTeves hatten sich Hateke v'chumel gab die andere Gimel Tzemes. As a feeling how you call b'Shabbos lo hey yechel m'chesel yemachem nishnamer be'be'atzim yemzuk may be yem kippurim. The Baldas there is der Mokke von alle Sibes le Gimel Tzemes is the Rive Marchom for the Gimel Tzemes. This is also the reason, possibly. This is also the reason for the fact that the 10th of Teves has a certain stringency to it that we don't find by the other three fast days. What's the stringency? That if this fast day would fall on Shabbos, we would fast.
It's the only one.
The only one of those four fasts that are instituted for the destruction of the temple. It just happens to be that it cannot fall on Shabbos. But if it would, we would fast. The reason is because it says in the Tanakh, it says in the books of the prophets discussing the 10th of Teves, it says, Be'etzam hayom hazeh, in the midst of this day, they laid siege. And this is a language that this same word says regarding Yom Kippur. So they compare it to Yom Kippur, then Yom Kippur, of course, if it falls on Shabbos, we fast. So the same thing here, if it falls on Yom Kippur, on Shabbos we would fast. That is not the case with the other three fast days. They fall on Shabbos, you don't fast. And they do. The other three could fall on Shabbos, and they do fall on Shabbos, and we push it off to Sunday. And the reason it's more strict is because the other three are a result of this one. So it has a stricter law. Und wie bald der Churban bei Yeshen in der Golische Aidese ist ein Hemmschuh von Churban bei Yisrischen, befragt es auf viele die Gulu, es man bei Yeshen ist nicht gewähnt, a Gulu Schleim, in bei Yeshen in Chosre, warum Gulu, kommt es, also Asara BeTeves ist das Chol of the Sibbe, close in Nagolis. And since, although we're talking about the first temple, and but subsequently we already built a second temple, so it would seem that Asara BeTeves and all that is in the past, there's no relevance anymore, right? So we should be more concerned about the days related to the second temple, not the first. He says, but nevertheless, he says, the Asara BeTeves is still the beginning of all the tribulations, even this last exile, even the destruction of the second, because the second temple really, they went back from Babylonia to Israel to build a second temple after 70 years, right? He says even during the second temple era wasn't a complete redemption. He says certain things were missing in the second temple. It wasn't already the same thing. So the 10th of Teves began the exile, all exiles. It really began the whole, because the second temple wasn't really a perfect situation. We never really got out of the first exile. So the 10th of Teves is the day that exile begins. That's this day. Teire sagt der Klal, also Gott Baruch macht im Refuah lamak. Shapirushe gibt dem Keach, if haben dem Eifen Achinail in Refuah, aber das ist bei Eifen von Leyasim Alech. Nicht nur ist es eine Refuah, was helft mir kann Lahabe, oder a viel Refuah, was peil Lamafreya, nor noch, man muss hat Chil Leyasim Alech. The Torah says, the Torah gives a general rule, that the Eibishter God, before he makes you sick, he gives you the ability for a complete recovery. In other words, before a person, not only a person, every kind of malady, every problem, every trouble that God makes, he already, before the trouble came, he already puts in place the ability for complete recovery. But complete recovery means the highest form. What's the highest form of recovery? That when you recover, it's not only that from now on you're healthy. It's not only that it's as if you never became sick to begin with, that you restore to your original health. But it's as if you never were sick, like the Pasuk says, that he's going to heal us in such a way, the healing from God comes in such a way that to begin with we don't get sick. So when a person does get sick, God, obviously before he got sick, or any trouble that he has, he already put in place the illness, the ability for the answer to this malady, the recovery, the medicine, or the way to recover in the highest form, where it's as if you never got sick. To give you an example, in this parsha that we learned yesterday, what did Yosef say to the brothers? Yaakov has to go now to Egypt, a terrible thing. But what does Hashem do? He puts in place already before Yaakov has to go down there to fulfill the covenant, the prophecy that God made with Avram by the covenant that your descendants will end up in a foreign land. So that's Egypt. But Hashem sends Yosef there beforehand to make the experience in Egypt the ultimate, the best experience, the possible for the Yaakov and his sons. So before the malady, he already has the refuah. That's the general rule. Before he makes the problem, he already has in place the way out, the solution. Der Fun ist sehr verstandig, also ich bin der Marke von Golus, da Gott Baruch macht und Refuah macht. This also it's also understood, therefore, that before God made the sickness of Golus, the blow of exile, he already put in place beforehand the answer to Golus, the solution to this blow, to this sickness, to this Golus. Noch der hat sich angegeben, der in der Golus, das gewinnt knall bei Jesus, samachmal Bavel Jerusalem, aber der Rebische schon angewiesen, wo ihm was es besteht, die Refuah, und in dem Eifen von Leyasim Alech, that before Hashem put us into the state of Golus, which was, when did we say started the Golus? On the 10th day of Teves, today, with the laying of the siege of the king of Babylon, laying siege on Jerusalem, so that Hashem already put in place, showed us how the solution to this Golus would be in place, and not only that we should get out of Golus, but in such a way that once we get out, it's as if we were never in Golus. It's as if we never went into Golus. The solution is so great that there's no trace whatsoever of this. Before the 10th of Teves, Hashem already showed us the solution. Before we even got into the problem, He already gave us the solution. And He's going to explain that. Die Chazal sagen, dass die Sibbe auf dem Teke verehrig von Golus Achren bis als Lenis Gale Kitzam is der Oven von Sinas Chinam. Our sages tell us that the reason for the terrible lengthy Golus, exile, this latest exile that we're in now, which is how long already? Thousands of years. It's so difficult that we don't know when it's over. We weren't told when this is coming to an end. What was the reason? Because why do we deserve this? What sin brought this about? What brought this about? Sinas chinam, wanton hatred. hatred of other people for no reason. But Pisa Poshu that the refuah gula, if golus is the hepech, avas chinam avas Yisrael b'shlemus achdis Yisrael. And therefore it's obvious that the healing of this terrible sickness of golus is the opposite of that, which is baseless love. Wanton love of another person, of another Jew, the ultimate oneness of the Jewish people. Und ich bin jetzt zu Churban Bayis Rishon, was es gewähnt, nicht zum Tzatzi Banal, nur zu die Gimel Averis und Avede Zara Gilareis und Shichas Dam, ist doch aber Jedu, was Chazal sagen, als viele, wenn Eden seine Reichmann und seine Avede Zara, selbst ist eine Wacht, es kann keinen Tam, kein Schlitt auf See. And even regarding the first exile, the first destruction, which was not because of hatred, but because of the other three terrible sins of idol worship, sexual immorality, and murder, the Jews were guilty of all three. So that's why the first temple was destroyed. So he says, nevertheless, it is also related to the fact that they were not unified, they hated each other. Because the sages say that even when Jews sin, the worst sins, if they are one, they are together, they love to have a Avos Yisrael, love of each other, nothing can destroy them. And the fact that the temple was destroyed shows that they were not, that even that sin was also in place. So the bottom line is, all the exile, the second temple and the first temple, was because the sickness we have because of the sin of baseless hatred towards the other. Davon, if Sie sagen, als noch jeder, es hat sich angegeben, die Marke von Golus ist in der Mozart Gufe, sagen wir mal, Bavel hat der Ebester gegeben der Kirche, if Shalom wacht, das macht the full Marke. Therefore we must say, according to this, that even before this sickness of Golus started, which was when today, with the laying of the siege of the city. So in the siege alone, in this sickness, the Eibush already planted, gave us the strength for peace and oneness, for the opposite of this terrible sin, which is the solution to this problem. Where do we have that? So now we're going to explain. The Bir was it. The Pu'ula von Amotzer bepashtis is ein yetze ve'ein bo. What is the meaning of a siege? When in Babylonian they put a siege around Jerusalem. What is the meaning of this? You can't get out and you can't get in. Those that are in are stuck inside, and those that are out can't get in. Correct? Keine von der belagerter Stadt kann nicht herausgehen. Der Heinas ist ein Matze, wo alle müssen bleiben zusammen in derselben Stadt. That means that everyone in the city of Jerusalem was stuck inside, together over there. Und kein Fremder, nicht von Teish wie ihr, kennt da rein. Es ist dort nur Eden. And someone from the outside, a stranger, cannot get in. That's also a result of the siege. So what turns out, that who's in the city of Jerusalem when they laid the siege? Only Jews. Only those that lived in Jerusalem. No one can get in. No negative influence can get in there. And those in there can't get out. That means this city of Jerusalem, which what's the meaning of this? What's the purpose of the city of Jerusalem? A city that brings us all together, right? It connects Jews as one. That's what Jerusalem is all about, by the way. That's what it says. I mean, where's this? It's a place where everyone converges upon, the highest. Nochmal, der Linie von Jerusalem ist wie angedeutet in ihrem Namen. Yirei Shalom, Shleimus Hayira. More, he says even more. The meaning of the idea, the concept of Yerushalayim is as the very name indicates. Yerushalayim means Yirei Shalom. It's made up of two words. Yirei Shalom. Yerushalayim. Yirei Shalom, which means, Yira means fear, and Shalom means perfect, complete. Which means that the fear of heaven is complete and perfect amongst those that live there. Und wie es steht in der Rishonim, als Jerusalem hat Beispiel wenn Jerusalem, ist die alle, was pflegen dort kommen und haben gesehen, die Avede bemikdash. Und das ist bei sie verblieben, echt noch sehr umkehren sich heim. And as it says in the commentaries, that Jerusalem, being there, when Jews came there, on the pilgrimages, or whenever they came there, it affected that they should have a heightened and a greater level of fear of God, and it had such an effect that even when they left Jerusalem, went back home, it remained with them. That feeling, that awe of heaven remained with them. That's what Yerushalayim created. It was a perfect place to become a Yerushalayim, a person that has fear of heaven. And the very name indicates it. Der Motzer Yerushalayim bringt zu them, as nicht nur sollen alle Jiden sein beachtens noch noch, as auch die Achtens soll sein in an Ort von Schleimus Hayira. And Achtens was im Yusuf Teir und Mitzvah Sedusha. What is the siege effect? Laying siege on Jerusalem had an interesting effect. That all Jews that lived in Jerusalem were there as one. They couldn't leave. They were stuck together. And the being stuck together where? In a place of Yerushalayim, which brings about the greatest fear of heaven. That means that this achdus, this oneness that was the result of this siege, was a oneness that was based on a holy concept, in Yerushalayim, which brings about the greatest fear of heaven amongst Jews. So whether this siege turns out to be not such a bad thing, if you think about it. It forced upon the Jews to be one in a place that brings about God's fear of heaven. In other words, what we have over here is that the beginning of the exile, which is the 10th of Teves, which is when they laid siege on the city, in that was already planted the seeds, the solution to this problem. What was the reason that we went into exile? We were not united. We were disuned. There was discord and hate and so on and so forth. So God makes a siege, which is the terrible thing, right? Which is the beginning of the sickness, the beginning of this blow, the beginning of Golus, the beginning of exile. In the siege is already the solution. That provided the solution how to get out of this exile. Der Ihnen Achtes, was der Motzer ist, jedem hebt sich an über Goli, bald beim Money for the Motzer. This oneness, this unity amongst Jews that the siege caused began immediately. As soon as the siege began, it started. Jews began to feel we're stuck here together. What happens when you're in a situation like that? You unite. You become one. Nach Edem hebt dan vielen de Makel und Zorres von der Motzer. That oneness, that unity, you feel the positive part of the siege even before you feel the negative parts of the siege. Because when do the negative parts of the siege set in? A while later, not immediately. The first thing you feel when you're stuck together is you're stuck together. You're one. You're together. You're united. What the siege later brings about? Famine and other problems. You can't get in food. You can't get in supplies. But that's already a later stage. So the positive part, the solution started before the sickness. You follow what's happening here? Das Einnahme der Stadt. It's certainly the unity that's felt because of the siege is certainly felt before the ultimate goal of the enemy, which is to destroy the city. That certainly came later. So the positive effects of the siege came before the negative effects. The solution came before the sickness. Papiza is moving. Der Eisdruck bei dem Motzer she'ein rogel klal samach melech bovel von shedish und smich und hilf. This explains, the Rebbe explains over here, the language that is used by the rabbis to describe what happened on the 10th day of Teves. What did they say? Samach melech bovel. What is the word? Melech Bavel means the king of Babylonia. What does Samach mean?
Happy?
What? No, not with the sin. It's a Samach, a different word. Samach means, there's the root word for Samach is smicha, meaning help. A support.
Support.
Samach means a support. There's somehow, the language that the rabbis used, Samach also means, came close. So Samach Melech Bavel, that means that this Melech Bavel, the king of Babylonia, closed in, came close, and that's what they mean also. But the words that they use, instead of using the more common language, what it should have been, they closed in or something, they use the word Samach, which means helped. But Nachmer, yeah. He says even more. Dass sie nicht gewinnen am Matze, in welche Jiden haben sich eingestellt bei Bechirasum, nur Nebuchadnezzar hat Machria gewinnen Jiden, sie gefunden sich in Amai mit dem Matze, was hat mit der Teva Gering werden gebracht, achtes Yisrael in Jerusalem zusammen mit dem Beis Hamikdash, und das soll Vater sein, der Motzer bis in der Nefen von Leosim Alech. He says even more, he says, this situation that the Jewish people found themselves in, that they're all locked up in the city of Jerusalem and as forced to become one, was not something that they chose. This was brought upon them from an outside force, from Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia. That means that he forced, right, the Jews who found themselves in Jerusalem he brought about that the natural outcome should be, he forced the natural outcome, which was that the Jews should finally get together and become one, especially around their oneness was their unity was was in Jerusalem by the Beis Hamikdash, the highest form of unity, the highest level of spirituality. Think about it. That's what Nebuchadnezzar forced upon the Jewish people, at least in the beginning. And that ultimately, of course, was the attitude that did away with the ultimate exile, which is how we're going to get out of exile, which is through how? Through unity. Through Achdus Yisrael, the opposite of what brought about the exile. So who brought this upon us? Nebuchadnezzar. Doch Norman hat das doch Bechirach aufschuss, hat der Matze von Motze nicht aufgetan an Nacht des Amitzes und Meil hat Nebuchadnezzar gekannt, sie haben Maschlit. What happened was, Nebuchadnezzar, what did he do? He laid siege on Jerusalem. That forced Jews to find themselves in a situation that naturally they had to bind together and become one, and this oneness was around the Beis Hamikdash, which is the solution to the problem to begin with, right? And that if they would have really then utilized that moment and united in a real way,
the whole thing would have ended.
The whole thing would have ended. And meaning that there would never have been an exile. Remember we said before, the ultimate of a solution, of a healing, is what never happened to begin with. That's what would have happened.
But it didn't happen.
It didn't happen because Jews have freedom of choice, and they chose differently. They were in a situation where it could have ended right then and there in the highest form, but they chose not to utilize that oneness. So they were not. It didn't result that way. So Lepeil Mamish, they broke through the walls, the destruction happened, and we're here where we are. But the solution, Hashem already put the solution before the market, before the sickness, before the blow. The idea of the 4 fast days is to arouse our hearts and to open up the way for tshuva. But durch dem zikaron von die Dvorim was haben gegeben gewesen ist Asara is nashul lehit, because when you remember what brought about this day, which was sinas china, the want and the hatred, this will give us this will bring about a feeling to correct that. Ist verstandig, also Asara BeTeves der Mann der Jiden lechel reish as der Weg von Mavatel sein ist Asara ist durch Chavis Yisrael v'Achdus Yisrael. So it's understood that the 10th of Teves, the first thing it does is to remind the Jew what brought this day about, the negative, not having Ahavas Yisrael, not having unity. So that will bring a feeling to have the opposite, to fix it, to bring one Jew closer to another person. And alle Yidden darf sich einschließen zusammen bis an der Neven von Chuber L'Yachtem. So we become one to the point that we're literally united as one. Und mit der Anachtus, was verbunden mit Shleimus Hayira, Beis HaMikdash Apnim, V'Shachantem Seichem, Yislev Teremitz. And what kind of oneness? Such a oneness that is based on Yerushalayim, the perfect fear of heaven. And around the Beis HaMikdash, even though we don't have a Beis HaMikdash today, but we have an inner Beis HaMikdash, every heart. So we have to become one around the ideas of Torah and mitzvahs. You know, you can become united in a cause that's not proper. So that's not real unity. And Jews have done that in the past. They've bonded together in negative, for negative purposes, more than once. What he's saying over here is that the achdus, that the oneness that was forced upon the Jewish people in Jerusalem because of the siege, was where in Yerushalayim in the Beis HaMikdash situation, around the idea of Yerushalayim, around the idea of perfect fear in heaven. That's the only achdus that counts, really. It's the only unity of Jews that counts, is when they're united around Torah mitzvahs. Und demol wird sein der Bittel Atzeimus. Und noch wird sie wollen es happen werden, li es Yomtiv, even mei Simcha, Sosem Simcha. And then, this will be mevatel, will do away with, will nullify, will annul these fast days. And not only will we not fast on these days, but it says that they will actually turn into festival days. So it's not just it won't be a fast, it'll be even a Yom Tov. Und wie bald als die Yeride von Asara BeTeves ist größer wie die andere Zeimes Kanal Sifal. And since the blow of Asara BeTeves, the Golus, this is a worse, what happened on Asara BeTeves is even worse than what happened on Shiva Asar BeTammuz on the other three fasts, as we said before, because this was the beginning of it all. So the Yeride, the descent on Asara BeTeves is worse than the descent on the other 3 days. But Eich the Aliyah is aggressive. So when this turns into a Yom Tov, it'll be even a greater Yom Tov than the other 3, because it's always that way, commensurate with the descent is the ascent. As es wird sein in a Madrege von Etzem HaYom Hazeh. Bedugma zu Yom HaKippurim L'mal Yuseh. It'll be like Yom Kippur. What do we say? That if this day falls on the Shabbos, we would fast. Why would we fast? Because it says on this day, the Etzem HaYom Hazeh, like it says on Yom Kippur. So it will have the great advantage of Yom Kippur. Shabbos Shabbosin, versus Hechem from Shabbos Hasiri Yekesh, which is the highest form, the highest level. It says that the 10th day of Tishrei, Yom Kippur is the 10th day of Tishrei, and it says that the 10th is always holy. Regarding the tithes, that the 10th animal is holy, the 10th, So the 10th day is holy in the highest level of holiness, even more than a regular Shabbos, in a sense. So Asara BeTeves will have a certain resemblance to that, and that's why, because the descent was so great, the ascent will also be similar to Yom Kippur. That's a pretty happy, pretty serious day. But that's the point of this whole Sikha, was that Hashem plants the refuah, the healing, the agent that heals, that fixes the problem before he even makes the problem. And this was vividly expressed in Asara BeTeves when he lays a siege. You see it as a negative, right? But there's a positive. A siege is a positive. Because the positive outcome of a siege is felt even before the negative outcome of a siege. What does a siege do? It forces everyone in the city to become one. We're one in Yerushalayim, in the Beis HaMikdash. The highest thing, the best thing. The answer to the Golus. So it would never happen if we would have taken that immediately to heart. Then the rest would never happen. Shivasa wouldn't happen. Shivasa B'Tammuz wouldn't have happened. The highest form, what was the highest form of healing? Loi osim alecha, where you don't get sick to begin with. That would have happened on Asara BeTeves. The good part of Asara BeTeves would have, he planted the healing in such a way where it doesn't have to happen, the negative doesn't have to happen. We have freedom of choice, we didn't choose to behave that way, so the rest did happen, but it could have been otherwise. And that's the meaning of Samach Melech Bavel. The Melech Bavel helped us. The word Samach means helping. Because that's what it was. He didn't intend to help us, but
Yeah.
what it was that's what it was. What he did
the ability.
was a help for the Jewish people to get out of this mess, where they wouldn't get into the mess.